So good morning, everyone. This is the inaugural session of this entire Flying Research Kites workshop series that we are having starting from today and carrying on till the end of August. We have as yet only given you the schedule for the first 6 workshops. More will follow. So what I would want to firstly share with you that what is the kind of motivation with which we have decided to organize these workshops. I have a short presentation which I will then make. Now, my request to you is this, that as I am making the presentation, because this one is the inaugural workshop, it's somewhere trying to give you the nuts and bolts of doing research. And I would want you all to be kind of keeping a pencil paper next to you and do some activities, not like a huge amount, but some kinds of invitations to write down, jot down certain things I would be making to you. And also, after I finish my presentation, what one would want is that as one goes to different parts of the presentation, you kind of ask your queries or bring in your discussion on for each part separately. Because otherwise, in an online program, it's very difficult for it to be an interactive exercise. In order to make it an interactive exercise, this would be this is how I would encourage you to participate, and so that we can have it as a structured thing, and we're not, it doesn't become a one-way street. At the same time, you get an opportunity to ask queries or concerns which bother you. So I'll start off with my presentation, and basically I want to give you the structure in which the whole presentation is going. I'm going to begin with talking about why innovation is such a special challenge in law, and then to speak about some of the more recent developments which possibly make doing innovative research or to make original contribution that much the more difficult for your generation than it was for people like us. Because at that point of time, just you're being able to creatively put together or ferret out material was seen to be a great contribution. We can't say that kind of thing today with the whole information overload and information revolution. Then I sort of talk about the route to innovation as such. Despite all this is no different in law from other disciplines, and then proceed from selecting an area to reaching a problem, and why is it that when you decide to do your research, it's so very important that you must find a problem. It's like often we say that finding a problem or having a problem is something which is not desirable. I should also firstly begin by saying that this workshop itself is an experiment in research. In the sense that a lot of us have been feeling for a while, especially those of us who have been on the research board of Nalsar and other places, that possibly more thinking and research needs to be happening before you put up research proposal. A lot of people believe that once a proposal has been accepted, then you start research. Our entire workshop is kind of motivated from this point of sharing with young researchers that actually before you decide to whether you're registering for a PhD or you're doing a postdoc work, the research has to happen before, not after your registration happens. Because if you've done sufficient amount of research beforehand, you have got yourself at least a topic, you have some kind of a problem. I'm not saying that when you go for your registration, you're all sorted. Because if you were all sorted, then the whole point of what you're going to do in the next few years doesn't happen. But very often people believe that if you have some fuzzy kind of an idea, this is the field in which I want to work, or this is the topic on which I want to work, that is sufficient. And that runs into all kinds of difficulties. You spend at least the next 2 years of your PhD program in just trying to zero in and work out exactly how you should do your research. You also have this difficulty on, in terms of what is the material which is relevant for you, not relevant for you. And I think what I am inaugurating this workshop with, firstly telling you exactly how you research before you begin research. What is it that you need to be doing before you start a research proposal? A lot of you who have registered are planning to do PhDs and felt that it would be worth their while to be attending these workshops just for that purpose, and it's with the same motivation. And I suppose both Vasanthi and I can say that we're doing it with the requisite amount of nervousness, which is what happens when you are doing anything new for the first time. But the motivation behind it, and I'll go back to it at my last slide all over again to explain to you what is it that you can be expecting from these workshops. I'm beginning with talking to you about why innovation is a special challenge in law, then proceeding to talk about what are the challenges which have come in more current times, which need to be addressed accordingly. You can't, a methodology created for an earlier period when the whole socio-political and academic situation was different is not something that we can just transpose into current times. I'm accepting the fact that despite all these changes, you still need to, the innovation that you're looking for or the original contribution that you wish to make is not very dramatically different from other disciplines. And then I'm sort of tracking for you this whole, route from area to questions, no, from area to topic to question to problem. And then I'm not going further and talking further on how then you address the problem, what you do in relation to sources and all of that, because that is something I feel that we would address or do with whoever gets registered in terms of a part of research methodology coursework. What we are doing with you is more like the work which has to happen before you are registered for a topic. What is it that you need to be doing so that both that you get registration and two, that when you start your PhD work or your other research work, you're not sort of stumbling around just trying to make out what is it that you need to do. I speak a little on the aids in this doing of this search before the research, and lastly speak about what are these workshops going to do and not do. I mean, I'm talking about both there. So to reiterate what I said to you before I started sharing the presentation was that in each of these, some level of queries will arise, but the largest number is this whole route that we're going to track from area to problem. I would want at that point of time, I'll actually point out to you that, listen, just jot this down and then put it in the chat box. Professor Vasanthi is kind of moderating the whole, the discussion part. So she would at that point of time, highlight what are the kind of queries which are coming in, and that's wherein we try to work out or try to do this in as dialogic a manner as is possible. There are always the limitations of an online program, but what we've all realized is also there are also the opportunities of an online program, because so many of you who are so far-flung could possibly never have come together in a classroom unless and until we were doing it as an online program. So instead of what should I say, cribbing about the fact of that, the opportunity or the connection that we could make if we met in person, I have sort of tried to see it as that, all right, there's a whole range of connections that one can make because of the fact that we are not meeting in person. So like, what is it that what technology has opened up for us? We should keep that in mind. It would be helpful. Also, because then it gets you to innovate in terms of methodology. Okay, all right, if your meeting space has changed, what is it that it's opening up for us? Now, I begin with this whole question of why innovation is a special challenge in law. And what I haven't said here, but I would kind of want to put in as a gloss is, as I finish this slide or as I finish presenting this slide, when I say lineage-based and understanding of what constitutes law, all of us recognize the fact that the very positivist understanding of law is that, all right, there are designated kinds of authorities who have been given the power to be making law. They are the people who have the authority, whether it is the legislature or the judiciary or the executive. Different entities have been given a certain kind of power. And the way it works out is this, that you're saying that, all right, if it has come from the legislature, it is law, or if it has come from the courts, it is law, or it's like, so you are in some manner, like what Martha Nussbaum puts out as, like if it's coming out of a pasta machine, it must be pasta. So you don't then work so much on trying to worry about, and that's a certain dominant encounter all of us have in what we see as law and what we see as not law. And the fact that in common law countries we give this kind of importance to precedent is again demonstrative of the fact that, yes, the whole business of what is and what is not law at one level is theorized as a very settled kind of an exercise. And what tends to then happen, or did happen for a fair amount of time in what you would see as legal scholars, is that they kind of had a mastery on, all right, what is it that, there are so many lawyers, I mean, many of you must have met them, who have like the various judgments which come in from different courts, how they vary, how they differ, how they distinguish, like literally on their tips. So it's a mastery of a particular area, which kinds of is the manner in which a lot of I would say legal expositions tend to happen. The kind of treatises has come work on that. So there is a lot of emphasis on recycling rather than creation. You say, okay, this is what has come from the courts, the legislature, and we are on this constant kind of engagement with it. Now, where even in the theoretical space, if we are not looking at this particular dominant model, that is the positivist model is definitely a dominant model, and all of you who've studied law have encountered it on a constant kind of basis. But if the moment you shift gears and you start to look at it, say, from a feminist perspective, or you take a more postmodern perspective or a critical look, you find that, all right, what constitutes law? You're starting to look at, all right, let's take the whole business of critical race. The manner in which you start to construct from a point where you would say, okay, so and so is the manner in which we are constituting the whole business of affirmative action, who we are giving what to, is according to what kind of specifications, say, came in a constitution or came in a special legislation. You are not asking the further question, how is it that this particular construction or this body of people have been given either this opportunity or not? How is it that even when you are having all of this affirmative action, people who are in social terms in privileged positions can still trump the ones who are being given these opportunities? Those kinds of questions come much more when you change your theoretical lens and you look from elsewhere. But because of the fact that the positivist mode of it, we largely say, but this is provided in the Constitution, but this is what the Supreme Court has said, or this is what the state legislature has laid down. And we don't then further ask that question, why have they done what they have done? And is it possible to do it differently? So and the reason why I'm starting from here is because if you begin from, it's like I'm telling you that a large amount of doctoral work is about finding a problem. It's not about saying what is the law, but how it is, why is it, those kinds of questions that you start to ask, you then necessarily build in a critique to what you are trying to do. And on the other hand, if this exposure has not come to you, a lot of us have found even the so-called schools of jurisprudence are done in a very mechanistic kind of manner. So you'd be saying, okay, there is this school and that school and the other. But you don't ask the further question that if I am changing my paradigm, if the school under which I'm looking at law, or the lens from which I'm looking at law, if that changes, what all changes? How many things do you alter? I work in the field of disability. So for me, it becomes like when you talk in terms of a person before the law, you'll say a person before the law is like, a person of sound mind. You're a major person of sound mind. And you don't ask that the soundness of mind, exactly what do you consider to be sound or unsound? The moment you start, you just take it as, you just, if anybody asks you who's a person before the law or who has contractual capacity, this is something that all of us have almost rote like spoken about. You'll also say that. What one is trying to introduce you to is just this, that the moment you don't take what is put out to you as, just the information orientation that we have towards the law, the moment we alter that and start to ask, but why is it in this manner? Why is it that, who do you consider to be of sound mind or unsound mind? How much of your social stereotypes are reinforced by how you construct the whole issue of soundness of mind? What you are starting to do there is, you are no longer speaking in terms of what is the Contract Act saying, or what is the property law saying, or what is the Constitution saying. You are saying, why is it saying what is saying? So, but if you don't do that, and that's why I'm beginning from here, then necessarily it becomes like just a compilation of information, just stuff that you have collected from everywhere, and you put it out there. Because the positivist outlook has this very kind of dominating presence in how we both do law and how we think about law, I would say innovation becomes a little bit of a greater challenge in law. But on the other hand, if you are cognizant of the fact, and I'm not in any which way denying that positivism has its own critique, but that critique evidently operates within that the basic premises or the basic principles laid down are not so much questioned. It's more a consistency that you're seeing, that, okay, if you are saying that you can amend the Constitution, does amending the Constitution, if you totally what should I say, reconfigure the Constitution altogether, something you all will be dealing with much greater detail tomorrow. If you reconfigure the Constitution altogether, can you still consider it amendment? The basic structure came in as part of the positivist theorizing, where you said that no, you can't possibly, if you have totally, like a liberal constitution or a socialist constitution or a secular constitution is kind of then changed into a more religious document. You say that we are setting up a Hindu Rashtra and not a secular country. Can you still be saying this is something you can do by amendment? Now, this is a kind of critique which has come in from positivist thought. I'm not denying that. But at the same time, there is, let's say, the free play in joints is relatively lesser. Your own personal contribution becomes less, and you feel very weighed down by what authority has to say on particular issues. So that's why a large amount of legal writing doesn't break away from whether it's the legislature or the courts or even the executive, how have they put down what is law? And then the only thing that I am doing as a researcher is I am either representing it or maybe asking small questions here and there, but I'm not asking foundational questions. And I think it's important for each of you, and this is the first query that I'll put out to you, in each of you to reflect upon, okay, how much of a hold has the entire positivist way of thinking about law influenced you? Or have you really encountered and concerned yourself with other ways of thinking about law, other schools of thought? I mean, I'm definitely talking a lot about feminism, but even feminism or critical race theory or the realm of postmodernism, the moment you sort of proceed, your theoretical underpinnings change. Does it in any which way alter the manner in which you start to see what is the problem posed for you before in law? Okay, so this is the first piece of my argument with you this morning on when you're talking in terms of innovation, then this is one kind of thing that is important for us as law people to think about. Unfortunately, jurisprudence, the way we do it in most law schools, and I mean, I think everywhere, it becomes like it is just one of those things that we have to do. You don't really see any great purpose to its, you don't see any great practical advantage of it. So consequently, it gets taught in fact, the Bar Council of India the only legal theory paper that they have retained as compulsory is the legal methods paper. So jurisprudence, which was like a pretty major part of the curriculum, has kind of virtually been relegated. Some schools still carry on teaching it, but it's been literally kind of, relegated to being just an optional paper, which people who are very interested in can do. I would somewhere put to you, and this is that if you are theoretically grounded, then to ask the why questions becomes easier to do. So yeah, what you need to be putting down somewhere for yourself is this, that okay, how much of my thinking about law only comes filtered through the positivist lens? How much exposure do I have of looking at law from other lenses than positivism? Does it help you to have, I'm not saying that positivism, like I've said, I'm not saying that positivism doesn't allow you to create critique, but at the same time, possibly when you're talking about original contribution, when you're talking in terms of innovation, you may find that the other schools of thought have a greater contribution to make. So ask yourself this question, that all right, have you made this relationship? Will it help you if you make it? Okay. So moving to the second part, when I'm talking about the challenges before us in current times, if you went to your library and you looked at some of the PhD theses which came at a certain point of time, I know for a fact that when I started to work in the whole realm of mental illness, unsoundness of mind was not like an indexed entry. With the onset of disability rights and stuff, you have started getting much, much more information around, okay, how are we treating people with disabilities? What's happening in relation to, whether it's their rights or whether it's the disqualifications and disadvantages, you have a more direct kind of encounter there. The point I'm trying to make is this, that I could say that just my culling out from various places exactly how the law treats people with mental illness, because it was not in any one place, and it was something I as a scholar was literally like, very much traveling through these various materials to be able to construct, okay, this is how the law treats a person with unsoundness of mind. So, and that information was not out there available. It was something that I had to cull out. And because I had to cull out and I was constructing and designing it, it became like, okay, the scarcity of information allowed you or gave much more of leeway for you to be able to make a contribution just by bringing together information which is disparate and not available at one place. Now, that is something which is not the case. In fact, what we have now is the opposite. You have something like an information overload. And it becomes like, okay, can I really master it? Because there is so much of it. It's like people ask you to do a survey of literature. Now, if you're talking about a survey of literature wherein what you would see as a designated field and how much material is accessible there are all in some manner, definable. There are boundaries which you can draw. But if you can't draw boundaries, then evidently how you should be doing a survey of literature becomes a very, very different thing. So this is all leading up to that whole question that is the thrust of my presentation. And why is it necessary to have a research problem which you are going to then solve in your research? Absent that problem, and this happens to a lot of people because you just have this big topic and you start work on it. So you create one mountain of information and then you don't know what to do with it because it is so much. You're sitting on top of it, and like that also explains why people come up with these mammoth theses, of 600 and 700 pages, which actually doesn't help anyone very much. But it is a challenge that your generation faces much, much more because of the fact that you have what is called as an information glut rather than an information scarcity. We operated more in scarcity times. And because we operated in scarcity times, it was possible to be mastering, and to be saying, acha, main isme expert hu. It's more difficult for you all to be doing it. So keep that in mind. The other thing is that, when I'm talking about the post-Foucauldian world, I'm not really just talking about Foucault. It's more in terms of that you have, from that point I made in the previous slide, where I was talking with you about, where I was talking with you about the fact of that, this lineage-based understanding, where you speak in terms of that, okay, so-and-so has power, this is the designated authority. From that, you are coming to a point where one of the things which Foucault brought in for us, he spoke about power being a more diffuse, it's a more diffuse kind of entity or a presence. So it's like in some manner, everybody possesses power, not just the sovereign. And that in very dramatically altered the manner in which you had to look at the whole, it's like, let's just take the recent examples. You enacted the farmers' bills, the farmers went off on this protest, you enacted the NRC, you had a large number of people who were opposing it. So you could be saying that at the end of the day, the state still won and did what it wanted to do. Or you could also be saying that, can you really be making law if the people for whom you are making that law are not in agreement with what you have made? The manner in which Foucault speaks about power and the manner in which we think in terms of identity, you have a much, much more diffused way of looking at it. You're talking in terms of the microsystems and the circulation of power which happens there. These are some of the more, like in this, the reason why I'm putting this as your counterpoint is, if you have a lineage-based way of looking at law, okay, fine, I have to look at possibly all the legislations or all the case law on my particular topic or whatever. But if you have a more, you're looking at the powers microsystems, then you can't really be saying that your understanding of what is law is going to be limited to only what comes in from designated authorities. And this is a challenge that one has to sort of like confront, because if you don't and you try to operate with that earlier model, you necessarily come up with a very simplistic sort of formulation which runs your entire research enterprise into trouble. Also, in some manner, the kind of original contribution that you could make, you're literally shutting your doors to it. And that's what one is saying, don't do it. It is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. To reiterate the point I made at the end of the previous slide, what I'm somewhere trying to say to you is that, all right, you need to again think, if I have so much information, I can't possibly follow the compilatory model. I can't possibly say everything that is there, I am going to become an expert in it, because there is so much of it that you can't be. So you need to then necessarily have a way by which you're going to slice through that information and say, I am creating something which only, with all of this glut, I have put out a way in which I am joining certain pieces and bringing out a design which only I have brought out. It's not so much to do with that I am unearthing information which no one else had, because that is something you can't really make a contribution to. In fact, in the next week, one of the workshops that we have lined up is to show how technology has opened up a whole range of research activities that you can carry out, or research projects that you can undertake, which you could not undertake without technology. In the sense, if I really want to be looking at very, very thoroughly all the, all the legislations which have been produced, I mean, the Aniket, who's the expert who's going to be doing it, will be demonstrating to you how this would be done. But primarily, it is like that it's possible for you to be getting all of that, like you can, there's a technical term that you can scrape all that information from these various places. So then what is your contribution? Your contribution is not the information, because that technology can help you do. But what you have scraped, what sort of patterns can you see there? What is it that it demonstrates to you in the manner in which, say, a specific issue has been addressed or not, is something which is possible for because of the fact that you have entire range of technological methodologies or technological innovations available to you, which were not available, say, in an earlier time. So you can be undertaking that kind of work, not a compilation work, but an analysis work, a combination of what we call as qualitative and quantitative research. It's possible to do that because you have that kind of technology available to you. But if you think that you're not going to use that technology and you're going to sit there and make some Maha compilation, everybody's going to say, oh, so what? I mean, this is something that one computer program can do. I don't need a researcher for this purpose. The researcher is somebody who can do something with that material which the computer can't do. And how many things it opens up for you, that, all right, what are the kinds of data that you can, what's the kind of data that you can unearth from these various places, and then to see what meaning it comes in. So this is something which is both a challenge and an opportunity that comes in more current day times. So to come up with any sort of an exercise or trying to do any research which is nothing more than a elaborate compilation, maybe at some point I would say, I know when we first had the first set of scholars started to do work in administrative law. Administrative law was not even an indexed item in the reporters. So they were actually going through cases and they were trying to work out, okay, I mean, I'm saying that you look at Jen and Jen, you look at, the first set of books which came on administrative law, they were actually starting from basic building blocks and trying to work out, okay, does an administrative law question arise in a specific case or not? To a point today where you just have to, type in a couple of keywords and all the cases that are relevant wherein an administrative law question arises, the program will do for you. The scholar doesn't have to do it. Whereas they did it more, through the dint of their labor and their persistence and commitment. So that is not required now. But considering this kind of data is available, what are you going to do with it is an important challenge opportunity of your times. So we are here. Now, how do we kind of see, the thing somewhere is this, and I think a lot of you in your 250 worders had said, I'm coming here because I'm looking for a topic or I'm looking for what I should do research in. If I want to do a PhD, or for me to be, and because PhD as such is increasingly becoming a mandatory requirement for all young researchers. It's no longer that, okay, if you want to do it, you do it. It's not that at all. And or if you want to be like, doing well, or you want the requisite career advancement, that you do a PhD. It's not that at all. It's like you can't even start a career without a PhD. With that sort of an emphasis coming in, and the requirement being that you get a doctorate or you get registered if you are going to make some kind of an original contribution to knowledge. So then it becomes very essential to see, how do I do it? I have, at one level, a lot of my education has more or less kind of indoctrinated me into understanding law as something which is top down. There are simultaneous developments which are also speaking about, not law not emerging just from the top, but law also emerging from the sort of practices that are followed everywhere. Now, both of these are your realities, but you need to be cognizant of these realities to then say, okay, how are you going to traverse your way through it? And this workshop is basically, aimed at imparting this elementary understanding that needed to be launched out. Because before you launch out and decide to do research in law or in any other discipline, it is somewhere important for you to understand and appreciate, what is it that you have to be doing through that entire work. It's a very important part of, it's a point I made in the prefatory comments when I started my presentation. This is about the search which has to happen before the research. And usually everybody tells us exactly what we want in a proposal. We are also told exactly what is expected in a thesis. What we are trying to at least have a conversation with you about is, okay, when you decide to work in a specific field, what are the kinds of things that you need to think about? And how you can go what is a process you can follow. It's like some level of, you could say, in the very 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 handbook style, or some kinds of, in the language of your time, it's some kind of hacks that we are sharing with you, research hacks, that okay, you travel this route, you might reach a point wherein you arrive at a problem. So, and that's basically the rest of my presentation, and you would say in some way the kernel of my presentation, to be equipping you with, okay, if you go this route, then you may just about work out for yourself how you are going to do innovative research and law. Before I turn to the next slide, I should make it very clear. If you came to this workshop thinking we were going to give you some kind of, half a dozen topics, that they will also come, but that comes in a very different kind of way. Much more what is coming is to help you to think on your work, to say, okay, if you do these kinds of activities, or if you engage in this sort of work, then the sort of outcome which may arise may be just the outcome that you are desiring. So I'm coming here from looking at from area to topic to questions, sort of things. Now I want you to take your pen and paper and put out, like, in all the various fields of law, which is the area which interests you or excites. Nearly everybody, you pick up any research methodology book and you ask, okay, which area should I work in? All, you would say, all experienced researchers would say that which makes makes you excited, makes your heart tick. Don't sort of decide on what you want to work on the basis of the aajkal ye bahut, I had a colleague, who decided to do something in gender. He wanted to work on sexual harassment because it was a very current topic. And it was like, as an individual, I would say that, you couldn't really work out the F, if you were talking about feminism, that, the F for feminism you didn't know. It was a bad choice. I mean, mercantile law and all of those areas kind of really drove him. He was very passionate about it, but he chose to do gender because he thought current hai. Like, this is something that people are looking for, so I should work in it. So the first point I would make for you, and I'm actually saying, okay, put down firstly, what area of law you could say, oh, this is something I'm really passionate about. You're coming to work, do a doctorate. You can't live for 4 years or 5 years with anything, any topic, unless and until the field in which you're working makes you happy. It's like a very elementary kind of proposition to make. But I'm not saying that you're just doing what makes you happy. It's also important that what makes you happy, that you're able to arrive at something which then other people find of interest. So it's like both the researcher and the reader. And the reader would be your examiner. The reader would be like possibly your peers, other sorts of people. When you publish, it would be other sort of people. But it's like, you can't say, "Mujhe ye interest hai, isliye main kar raha hu." To some extent, if I had to choose between kind of doing things which other people find of interest, and to start to choose for something which you are interested in, I say start with what you are interested in. If you totally believe in your work, do that. But you can't say, I believe in it, but no one else is interested in. Everybody saying, why are you doing it? So what? That so what kind of response can end up coming for you. And so you need to firstly say, okay, which area interests you? Then you need to distinguish between an area and a topic. It's like you could say that, all right, fine, if we say the whole business of climate change or the entire realm of constitutional law or criminal law, then this is a larger area. Within that area now, what is the topic in which you want to work? You need to then, that's the next exercise that you have to work out. That you have to carve out a topic which is specific enough. The reason, in fact, I have somewhere here, I think that if you can put your topic down in some 4 or 5 words, then evidently what you have done is so huge that you can't handle it. So it's important in some manner to be kind of working towards this thing that, all right, what is the topic in that larger area which interests me? And then you start asking questions around that topic. That you keep asking questions that till you find questions that interest you, all kinds of questions. Like you'd ask the what, where questions, but actually speaking, for you to move further, you need the how and why questions. Like the example I gave you at the beginning when I was talking in terms of a person before the law. In a person before the law, why is it that how is it that soundness of mind became such an important criteria? What is it? Who were you putting in here and who were you taking out? You had an entire period when women were not seen as persons before the law. The very fact that she was a woman, she stands excluded. For a long period of time where if you were a Dalit, you couldn't possibly be somebody who can have access to education. So you start asking those why and how questions. You are then arriving at or moving further that, see, what is it? We started out with a big area. We came into a topic. Now that topic on its own can't be sufficing. I need to, and it's not just about scoping. You need to then sort of say, okay, in this topic, what's the kind of query or question which bothers me? You keep asking, you keep writing. The other thing I would want to say to you, and I would say it right here instead of, because it may just slip my mind subsequently. See, very often we believe that when we have decided to work in a field, we read a lot about it, and then at some point after we've read lots and lots, and we start writing. That's not how you go about it. Hello? Is there a problem? Okay, so what you do is this, that you keep writing as you go along. In fact, I'm asking you to start that writing from right today. You work out what is your area. Then you say, all right, in this area, amongst the various topics which are arising, this one interests me. Then you ask questions on, okay, why? Why is it that, like this whole question, whatever it is that is of interest to you, that, like say for me, it was of interest that you are denying a whole range of people the opportunity to be deciding how they are going to live their own lives. In denying them legal capacity, you were not letting them make choices for their own lives, and you started to ask why. You also found that, all right, as you asked that why question, you increasingly found that this business of who you saw as a person before the law. And Roscoe Pound has done an amazing kind of an entire treatise on persons before the law, where you're saying that depending upon what the social economic considerations of a specific era were, that they determined who they would recognize as persons and not. Why you would not recognize slaves as persons. There was a certain point of time wherein the karta in Hindu law, or the patriarchs in Roman law, were like, even adult sons were not seen as persons before the law, and how this kept altering. There's a whole body of literature which is now coming in and saying this engagement with persons before the law itself is a wrongful engagement, because if you engage there, you're always going to find some people who are included and some people who are excluded. You need to think about personhood in a more palpable kind of manner, where your social, economic, political categories are not determining who's a person before the law. The point I'm somewhere trying to make is just this, that from an area to a topic, to questions, and you need to be asking, all right, which of these questions, if I answer, will I resolve a problem? Or which of these questions, if I answer, would be of interest to people other than just me? Nobody is denying it that sometimes you may have a question which other people don't see as a question, and you are so very intent on it, or you are so clear that this is something which needs to be answered. But usually when you are entry-level researcher, you are wanting that your work should be of value to other people too, so that the other route is equally important. Yes, this interests me, so I'm working on it, but I also find that a lot of other people are interested in an answer to this question. Hence, I am culling out and working on that question. From topic to questions, I'm saying is the other point. I'm saying that, okay, then I've already said this before, so I think the slide is coming later, and I have anticipated it. So what I'm somewhere saying is that you start to look at what is a problem either of the community or of a particular field which you are resolving by what you are doing, and to find out what interests others. That's wherein you do an entire body of reading, which is before you have started to research on an area, just to find out what is worthy of research. You look at journals, you look at conferences, you look at blogs, you look at archives, and you, like, I think the a particular book I was consulting was saying, look at the concluding chapters. You'll find nearly every scholar will have to say, will have suggestions on this is further work which is required. And in a manner of speaking, that gives you a kind of lead to what you can be doing. But you can't like just be content with a topic. You need to have questions. And I'm sort of like, you need to be saying, okay, in this topic, what is the kind of question that I want to ask? And I'm saying, what kind of questions? You naturally ask the who, what, when, and where questions. But what you really need to focus on, if we are worried about wanting to do this innovative research, you ask the how and why questions. And look at also questions that other researchers have raised but have not answered. You might find that that gives you what a toehold on what you can be doing. Ask questions that address issues in a new way. And what is the kind of questions you should avoid asking? Very often you find that people come to us with proposals wherein they want to do something, and you'd say, but okay, I mean, I remember there was a colleague who wanted to work on child soldiers. And you kept asking that, okay, but how are you? I mean, it is a problem, nobody is denying it, but is it a research problem? And this distinction between a social problem and a research problem is an important one. Because if you can't find hard data for it, if there is no way in which you can get informed about that issue, if the entire thing is all clamped and shut, the fact that it's a real social problem doesn't suffice for it to be a research problem. Any kind of questions are already settled, like so much work has happened, everybody knows what the answer is, wherein you're at the end of the day only culling out what other people have to say. That's not a good question to ask. If your question is like so micro that it doesn't really have any larger social relevance, that's also not a good question to ask. But at the same time, and I'm sort of, because I proceed from questions to problem, to be saying that, you keep putting down and saying, why, okay, when, who did this, what happened, when, that these questions are important. Why are they important? Because you have to get informed about the area in which you are going to research. They are not your contribution to research, but if you are going to be asking the how and why questions, you need to also ask the who, what, when, and where questions. But the who, what, when, and where questions are not going to contribute to your original contribution, are not going to make for your original contribution. It's basically the how and why questions. And these are the kinds of questions that you should not be asking, because it's like you're getting into an area. I've had this, I had a colleague years ago who wanted to work on female feticide. And I was sort of telling her that, that, okay, this is like something which is so much work has already happened on it. What is your new angle? Why are you doing it? And I said, where is the problem? And the kind of outrage I received was that you can't see this as a problem. And my thing somewhere was that, nobody is denying that it's a social problem. How is it a research problem? And ultimately, she looked at, disability-related abortion. She made a difference. She made a changeover, because that was something which was an unexplored area, which had a lot to do with the current understanding on giving value to a disabled life. So she found a whole new field in which she could work, because you started to accept the fact that there is this difference and distinction between a social problem and a research problem. It's like we often would say that when you encounter a social problem, you feel something undesirable has happened. And when you want to do research without a problem, it's the opposite side. It's like you just have to have a problem. If you don't have one, you have to create one. And that's partly the point that one is making, in the sense that if you don't have a problem, how are you going to decide in a time where there's information, There's this information glut that you are facing all of the time. How are you going to decide which literature, which material, which issue is of significance to you? Because your problem is your filter. It will tell you what is it that you need to work on, or you need to, like collate and keep, and what is it that is not really, it's interesting, but it's not for you. So it's like if you are working on any field, everything in that field is not relevant to you. And that's wherein this whole question of the topic, the scoping, the asking of questions and problem becomes very, very important. Because what you need to be doing is to work out the sort of transition that you need to be making. This is what I am working on. And that is something that you need to be, when you are putting in a research problem, a research proposal, that to have at least had, I'm not saying you're all sorted out. I'm not saying that at all. You might keep finding that you're fine-tuning progressively. But enough, like you got that kind of, you've pakro the chore. You've got that from where you can then proceed further. At least the end of the string is in your hand, and then you can kind of go through that entire maze. If you don't have that, then you are in another kind of difficulty. And this is the point I'm sort of saying, that how you proceed from area to topic to questions, and you evaluate those questions, and you proceed, and from questions and we proceed to problem. Now, questions are not in themselves a problem. Some of those questions will be then, are the kind of questions that research in it matters, and it's addressing a problem which the community thinks is a problem, which you wish to solve, or which you think is a problem which the community needs to understand, and have to keep looking for a problem which needs resolution. It should not be that you say, I am, at each point you're going to be saying, I am working in this area. Why am I working in it? And what am I going to get from it? And if you say that to somebody and says, so what? The moment you get a so what response, it means that something is not, you've not really been able to convince people that this is worthy of, this is something that they should support. And that's exactly the kind of problem that most researchers have when they are putting in a proposal to a research board, which a research board should feel that they want to back. That this is work that they want to back. This is work. This is the kind of research that this individual is doing, which will be useful for that institution, for society at large. And important. That's why it's important that doesn't matter. In Nalsar we asked just for 1,000-worder. We don't even ask for some 20-page thing. We just say 1,000 words you write on something which you feel we should register you for. But to write that 1,000 words, you need to be doing a whole range of other things. And that's the point I'm trying to make with you in this first workshop of this entire series, that you need to be beginning from saying, this is the field in which I wish to work. In this field, these look like topics which will be worth working on. Then you sort of keep asking questions around it. And the point I have made before, you keep writing this on a constant basis. The proposal itself should be written many times over, because as many times as you write it, you'd find that writing facilitates thinking in some manner. When you just sort of speak it out, it's not the same thing as when you write it down, or when you type it in, whichever way you want to be doing it, But it's important somewhere to work out that your internalizing of an issue, or your digging of that question, to a large extent depends upon how much of physical engagement are you doing with it. And to be arriving at, to say, okay, in this field, and it's a scoping down that you're having. And once you've found a problem, that problem will then help you to determine, okay, which kind of material, which body of writing, which kind of data is of relevance to you and which not. Don't forget that point I made with you, that we are living in an information glut time. If you don't have a filter, just the material can overwhelm you. And one doesn't want to be overwhelmed, so it's important to keep scoping down to reach a point which is a question which is specific enough, and yet not that kind of specific where people say, why the hell are you doing it? It has no relevance to a larger reality. That shouldn't be the case. At the same time, it's important that if it's like I said, I had a bullet point somewhere which was saying, if you can talk about what you're doing in some 4 or 5 words, then evidently it's something so huge that it covers everything. Like people will say, I want to work in women and law. Women and law may be the large field, but what do you want to work on? And if you pick up, then okay, I want to work on the whole question of, say, matrimonial property. Then you further ask, in matrimonial property, what are the questions which bother you? Why is it that you want to work on it? Why do you think that this is something which would be of interest to society at large? And the kind of material which exists has not answered those questions. That's the kind of exercise that one needs to be doing. Now, I'm saying that when you are doing this work, to some extent, I have mentioned this before, but I'm reiterating it partly because somewhere you see we have this, I start by asking you, what is your specialization? And you say, or what is your area of interest? And you say criminal law. So if you say criminal law, then is the Constitution of no relevance to you? Does the joining of criminal law and constitutional law give you something which wouldn't come otherwise? So I am saying, get acquainted with the topic within the discipline and outside it. So when you speak in terms of, say, anybody who's talking in terms of lie detection tests, now lie detection tests would be seen as, some part of criminal investigation. But you have, whether it is Selvi or there are a whole range of other judgments, all the kind of material which comes in there. Can you really talk about lie detection tests without sort of saying, okay, is this intruding on the privacy of an individual or not? You've had this very fascinating judgment which has come in from the Meghalaya High Court, which Professor Mustafa has just done a program on, where they have said that no, mandatory vaccination is a breach of the right to privacy. States should try as far as be to persuade. They shouldn't compel. To be saying, I mean, you can put out that you're saying that this particular because you have a right to business and profession. You can to invite people to come to your specific establishment. You can put out there all people vaccinated. But if you're supposing you really believe that no, you don't want to be doing vaccination, you should still inform other people not vaccinated. If they still decide to come to your to your establishment, that's well and good. Otherwise, you can't possibly breach into the other person's rights because of the fact that you have decided not to get vaccinated. The point I'm somewhere trying to make it is I'm get acquainted with the topic within the discipline and outside it. Within the discipline is where I'm saying, okay, look at what does constitutional law have to say to family law? What does criminal law have to say to, again, can you really talk in terms of criminal law and business law have nothing to do with each other? Because possibly if you start to look at criminal law and business law together, you may arrive at a problem which has not been looked at before. So similarly, when I'm saying outside the discipline, it's like, don't just look at how law views the issue, look at how sociology views it or how psychology views it. You might find that disciplines other than law, when you draw from them, they again give you a way of devising a topic which is specific enough and wherein you can make a contribution. Look at what is troubling others is something I had mentioned before, and look at suggestions being made by others into further work. In fact, one of the things that we are doing, if you look at the design of this Flying Research Kites workshops, it is about getting experts who, having worked in depth in a specific field, have found that these are issues in that field which need further work. So they're going to be throwing out those suggestions to you and say, okay, in our view, more further work is required here. If you are then excited by what they're saying, there are two things which are happening. They are getting someone to work in a field in which they feel work should happen. You are being, like, in a way, getting, like you have a guide when you visit any kind of a monument, or you visit a place with a guide and without a guide. I mean, the first time I took one, I realized that big difference which comes in, because otherwise you just, you wander around the entire place. You see certain things and you don't see other things. The guide just does that. He points out that look at this particular, carving, or this particular way in which this has happened. This is the period in which, I mean, you can have good and bad guides. That's not the point. But the issue is, what we are trying to say is that, all right, we are giving you guides who can say, if this is the field in which you are working, or this is the field which interests you, these could be topics, and these are some questions which need answering. From those questions, you can arrive at the particular problem you want to spend your time on. The problem is large enough for you to do a PhD on it, and yet not, yet not so large that it's unmanageable. And just to work that out to help you work that out is the kind of aid we are trying to provide. This first workshop that I'm the one that I'm doing today is more like I'm saying that, okay, in law, these are the difficulties that we have, because theoretically we've been grounded in a certain kind of a way. So if we, change theoretical gears, that can open up certain spaces for us. If we choose an area but don't sort of then start to see interconnections between what we call as intradisciplinarity, that is, you don't look at only the specific area you've chosen, but you look at how this kind of joins in other areas of law. Interdisciplinarity is another way in which you can somewhere which assists you in being able to carve out a specific kind of a specific enough topic, which then leads you to sharp questions and a problem. I've already sort of said this, so it's more like, because it is the first workshop, what I'm saying to you is that we're providing you with some basic building blocks on how to undertake your research. We're getting experts in the field who will share what they consider worthy of research. Largely, we are just giving you direction and how that can help you. Not a ready recipe, but like providing you with some level of support. So the next set of workshops, we have a colleague, the one that is happening next week, you have a colleague who's going to talk about, from a social sciences perspective, how are you going to be doing research? And the other colleague is speaking in terms of the various developments that have happened in the whole realm of technology, which have opened up, you have computer programs which can assist you in gathering a certain kind of data. So if you have 5 years, you're not going to spend the next 4 years just collecting that data and have no time to analyze it. Because the computer program will be able to get you access to that data, you can then sort of start to see, okay, what does this data as such imply? If you're able to say, look at all the judgments, all the original court judgments coming in a specific area of law, and you don't have to spend ever and ever to get it, then to sit and both quantitatively and qualitatively analyzing it, you're using you could say both the information glut as well as technology to be arriving and doing a body of research which you couldn't have done otherwise. We have a workshop on colleagues who are working in the field of family law and gender, and who are then saying, okay, what are the sort of issues which are worthy of research where no work has happened? A similar kind of thing we've done around criminal law, where you have a practicing lawyer who's sort of sharing with you the grassroots situation which requires research to be undertaken, and you have a sociologist who's kind of worked very closely in the whole field of criminal law to be seeing exactly not the normative part of the criminal law, but the practice of criminal law. How does it operate? Again, to be providing you with a range of suggestions on what possibly you could work on. The entire focus of the workshops is, I suppose, to provoke you to think, to get you out of the very standard kinds of topics that we all, we keep getting proposals on, to arrive at, to give you an insight on, okay, this is an area where work is needed. If it interests you, you could do it. So that's the way I would want to put it. So I think I'll I stop here, but I would like literally, of course, Vasanthi will be working this out and how she wants to moderate it. But what I am asking you to do is literally to say, okay, do two exercises. One, to ask that first question: how, to what extent am I influenced by the whole positive body of thought? And the second set of questions: areas which interest you. What do you think could be possibly good topics? What kind of questions could be asked? If we did some level of interaction and work on that count, you may actually find the workshop to be way more useful. Otherwise, it becomes like, okay, I came and said certain things to you, but they don't get internalized. But if what I said to you, even the first steps you start to take in the workshop itself, you can then build on it as you go along. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Chanda. I think you've invited them to do some thinking.
So give them 5 minutes to think.
Yes. And so people can put things in the chat box. So I thought I'll just say that instead of trying to unmute yourself and, trying to coordinate that, it'll be great if you can just put it in the chat box, and I will go through the questions and flag them off. So we'll give you 5 minutes. I know the questions are coming in, but we'll take some time and then we will start looking at the questions. Because sometimes it's just the first one off the gun is privileged as against other people who are kind of just.
No, that's what I'm saying, is give people, I mean, as such, after a long presentation, I think people need some time to reflect upon it. I would encourage you to firstly reflect and then write. Don't be off the blocks at once.
Yes.
It's like, amongst the things that we are encouraging you to do, is that the more number of times and the more drafts you do, even of a question that you're going to ask, you may find that you are asking something which will benefit you and everyone else that much the more. We have the time, we'll wait it out. We don't have a problem with that.
Yeah. So please think about your questions and post them, and I will be reading them as and when you post them.
Vasanthi, can I make a comment on the two questions which are already there in the chat box, so that I'm not answering them, at more like a comment?
I mean, so I've just given people time to ask a couple of.
Fair enough. I just wanted to ask you, because I don't want to.
I think it's important to give that break also, so that people are thinking.
Yeah, sure. No, I also wanted to sort of tell people that, listen, amongst the things to be useful is not to be asking generic kind of big questions, because you ask those generic big questions, it doesn't in any which way work in a workshop mode. It makes way more sense to be sort of like, saying, okay, this is what I see as an area which interests me. This is the kind of topic. Am I thinking in the right direction? If one reflects and works on that, or works on questions like, okay, how much are we, what's a body of thought that has influenced us as law students? It might be worthwhile to proceed in that mode, because it sets you on a reflection mode.
So we have a set of questions, and all of which are asking very different kinds of questions. Do you want to start with the first question itself, Professor Dhanda, although you have answered it in a certain way? But I think it's also tied up to the question of how does one find a research problem? How does one, without knowing what is the literature, do we start with the literature? Do we start with the problem? Do you want to start with whether this whole business of empirical research, which is what a lot of people are promoting as innovation, is the best way to go about it?
Okay, I wouldn't sort of when I was speaking in terms of, being very, very dominated by the positivist outlook, I was not in any which way saying that we have to now, all of us have to go to the field. I'm not saying that at all. I'm actually sort of saying I'm talking in terms of perspectives. and saying that, all right, when you can have a more critical perspective towards what you are doing. And if you are proceeding from where you don't look at designated authorities as providing for the final word in terms of everything around law, to a point where you pick up other ways, other lenses of looking at, then you are, and that's definitely doctrinal. I'm not in any which way saying that you go, everyone has to go and do empirical research, because I don't think that's a particularly smart necessity. Like, okay, we are all going to be doing empirical research is not the proposition I was putting forth. And I definitely don't think that, I think law schools still largely do doctrinal work, and we largely register doctrinal students. The only point I'm trying to put forth to you all is this, that this doctrinal work that you are doing can be done in a more imaginative manner. You don't do some kind of a compilation of material and believe that is sufficient. See, I'm not saying you don't have to do the compilation. To some extent, all of us have to do. You need to know what the blessed law is. If I want to be altering it, even if it is traditionally understood in a specific way, it's important that I must engage with it. The only point I'm trying to some way make with you is this: very often we believe, having done that, I have done enough. I mean, Vasanthi and I can both vouch for, you'll suddenly have a candidate who'll say, but what else do you want me to do? I've done everything sort of things. So what one is trying to do is that if in the first instance, you recognize the fact that you need to be working on the how, why questions rather than just be content with what and where. Because they'll say, I will look at what is the situation in India and in the UK and in the USA and some other this thing, and that you consider to be comparative research. The largeness of what you're trying to do is itself going to mean that you're just going to skim the surface. You're not going to do anything more than that. But if on the other hand, you just pick up, okay, just one issue, and you say that you're going to be looking at, the bottom-up way of looking at law is somewhere you're going to proceed on. You had, I think Vasudha Dhagamwar talked in terms of the worm's eye view. She used to say, look at the things from the standpoint of the worm. Now, just the moment you proceed in that manner, how many things open up? Whereas we always have the king's eye view, the person who's sitting on the pinnacle and the top. How they look at something is how we largely do law. That is the point I was trying to make with you. Empirical work, where people can do worthwhile empirical work, should be done. I'm not. But to privilege it as that is necessary, because empirical work can be as horrible as doctrinal work. You can come up with the most shoddy kind of empirical work. That's not the point. Somewhere, if I had to reduce my entire presentation to a single sentence, I was saying, think more. Think more. It's like a, to be mean, I could say the knees really hurt when you have to think, but I think it should be done. If I did a Punjabi thing, I would be saying that.
So there was one very interesting question from Siddhi, and she's saying, okay, I get very easily influenced, and that's something I can relate to. I mean, you read this, and we've had this happening in our methodology workshops as well. You listen to one person, you think this is the best thing that can happen, and then you listen to somebody else, and then you think that that's the other best thing, and so you feel very torn between two very good work done by researchers. So she had one very practical question that, okay, if I've done something in my master's, can I shift in my PhD? Which I suppose the answer is that of course you can shift. There is no, kind of tying you down to your master's specialization. Please feel free. But the other thing about influences, I think that's a good question, especially as we are reading. How do we make sure that you're not swinging from one end to the other, and what happens to like you gave an example of a colleague who started off with sexual harassment, they ultimately had to move to something else. So that is I think a very, very genuine question.
Well, what I would somewhere say is that I'll put out to you the practical hack I gave you, that as you are listening to people, even like if you were to think back on my presentation today, you write as to, okay, what appealed to you and what did not, what bothered you still. And then you look for other people who may have taken a different kind of perspective. See, one of the big advantages of a scholar is you have the freedom that you okay, somebody has influenced you, you allow, you concede to that influence, then look for counter influences, because those counter influences will help you think. To sort of believe that I have now read this, I'm all sorted. That's exactly the kind of modesty I think all of us require as scholars, to say, okay, this guy was so eloquent, has written so well, so I am, like floored. But evidently, there is more to this than I know. So maybe I should look for more. Sometimes, like looking at that person.
Sometimes you should just be the lawyer. Sometimes you should just be the lawyer. At least
absolutely, like look at the other side. Look at other materials. The point I am somewhere trying to make with all of you is just this: that don't don't be in this hurry कि हम बस अब ये settle हो गया, इसको हम लिख देंगे. That's wherein most of the problem arises. If you keep writing this down and saying, okay, this is what the person said, this I thought was a very significant insight I obtained from. But let me see what other people have to say about it. See, amongst the advantages that you have is that so much is available to you on the click of a, it's like literally speaking that just on a click, so much is available to you. So you can find out what have people to say on this field. So I would somewhere say is that, recognize the fact that you could get influenced, but then doesn't mean we throw baby with bathwater. We say we are influenced, but now let's work out counter influences so that progressively you start making space for yourself. You have to make space for yourself. Neither to be saying कि नहीं बस अभी हमने position ले लिया तो ले लिया. One doesn't have to take that kind of pranjay vachanjay kind of stuff. You don't have to do that. But at the same time, you recognize the fact that you need I'm planning to work on the pursuit of, I don't know, I'm sorry. This one just came up, so I looked at it. Just come to a more
trying to read all of it as you're answering is difficult. Yeah. But I thought I'd just help you.
I just saw this switch. Please, I mean, that is exactly why I asked you to be here, because I tried to do both together to be impossible.
So the other question that came up, that is there, Vaishnavi has this question, which is something we do in our methodology workshop as well. How much do you engage with work that is already there? Because sometimes the reading can be unending, but I think the point you had about having a filter, I think that is a very important.
Which is the point one is making, like why, if you proceed from the source to a problem, you're in trouble. You do some level of reading, of course, before you reach your problem. But after that is your problem, which largely guides you on the kind of material you must look at. It's an important thing somewhere to be saying what is relevant. I mean, I suppose the reason I got engaged with the person who was talking in terms of the happiness index, it's like there's a whole body of literature which comes in relation to, what makes for happiness. It's not legal literature, but there is a body of literature which talks about happiness. You might find that you don't have so much within transformative constitutionalism around it, but you may find stuff that people have done in psychology, people have done in, in the whole realm of self-development, which may give you very many more insights than just staying with constitutional law. That was basically the point I was making, is because then your problem is guiding what is the material you're consulting, not the other way around. Because you to say, because I'm a constitutional law person, I have to only look at constitutional law material. Constitutional law mein koi material nahi, ab main kya karu? I am saying is, if constitutional law mein material nahi hai, to dekho if there is something in other disciplines. Dekho if there is something in other areas of law. It is, all of us found it really that workshop that Professor Bakshi had done with us. Remember where he said everybody has to be a constitutional lawyer. You can't specialize in constitutional law. I mean, nobody can be a proper legal scholar without knowing constitutional law. Of course, you will look at it from your lens. See, it's like I look at the Constitution all the time from the standpoint of how it looks at disability rights. I mean, I've just been like asked, planning to write a piece on how federalism plays out in the realm of disability rights. Because, see, disability is a state subject, and yet all major legislations have come in as a union. This thing, because they were saying that they're fulfilling this or that international commitment. What is it that persons with disability have gained and lost in the whole process? That's the problem. It's a problem. It asks for certain kinds of questions out there. Then to say, okay, because see, amongst the big advantages of a federal structure is that you can try so many things there, and you can also come up with more regional solutions. So I am
in the realm of this whole business of pursuit of happiness, so it's also a question of what you were talking about as theoretical perspectives, right? So when you're moving away from the dominant understanding of constitutional law, for example, how much does the constitution accommodate emotion in general, not just happiness? The idea of emotion. So where are you going to read about emotion? Evidently, law is a very bad place, and at least one kind of law is a bad place to look for questions like this. But there is some work that's happening on emotions in the constitution. So it's true, but that will necessarily have to be interdisciplinary. So I think that whole focus of reading from different areas that you were making in your presentation is like very valid there.
I was looking at Philos's question where he's saying if you can't find concrete answers to a research question, are we
Yeah.
saying that questions which might not have a concrete answer are not research worthy? No, Philos, the point that I was making was more to this factor of not that it's not research worthy, but like if you are going to go out and do that, and especially when you're doing it as a doctorate, which is in a way a degree, if you don't have something which you're going to be arriving at the end of it all, then what is it that you are researching on? The concreteness doesn't have to be a physical concreteness. It can be a conceptual concreteness, but that much you require. Otherwise, what are you researching? You can't do कि भाई हम कुछ कर रहे हैं, especially when you're doing your doctoral work, and most of the people who are here are people who are attending the workshop as planning for doing their doctoral work. You will not be able to get your proposal through, firstly. Secondly, you won't have an examiner who will be convinced by what you're saying, and you have to think like that. If it is research worthy, then you need to be saying conceptually what is it that you have found there which is research worthy. That part you have to take into account, because you have to defend that thesis. No, you can't just be doing a thesis and it's not like hame ye pasand hai kind of things. I am saying start from what is passionate, what you are passionate about. That is important because that's what sustains you. I'm definitely saying start from there, but I'm still saying also that if you are not then concerned about whether I can sell this to people, whether other people will be persuaded by what I'm saying, then you get
Persuasion is key. Persuasion is key. You should be able to persuade people. A researcher has to persuade. It can't be that maine kar diya and everybody has to fall in line with what I'm doing. Yeah. But so there was one more question by Hirojit who talked about narratives in law, and also talking about how do you find material, and that's a big question, especially if you want to do something that's new that hasn't been done before. Then the big problem that you have is about material. So he's asking the question that if you have regional topics, like if you want to work on areas of law which are not necessarily national but which are specific to states, then how do you go about looking for material? And I think it's a very, very important question.
Well, on a very practical angle, I would say that if there is no material, then think again. Unless and until you can say you can ferret out that material, that you are ready to go and search for it on, go and look for it at various places. You worked out that it exists, but it's not. But to go and say, if you remember in the 3 questions I put out, one, if you have a question for which there's really speaking no material, then possibly it's not the brightest of questions to take up. And this is something we very often tell when, as a research board, we will tell a candidate that, listen, this is not a great idea. You're not going to find any material to do it. And if there is no material to do it, what are you going to do?
Okay, so the other question is about how does one make sure that what is the quality check about, how do you get a Deepshika has a question about how do you ensure that you're asking the right question. What is the way in which you find the right question? How do you narrow down on the question? How specific should the question be? I think there are many questions which are asking how specific, how do you know it's a specific question? How specific should it get? I think you did answer that by saying it can't be like something that you put down in 4 words, but it can't
No,
be too
I mean,
general.
it's also got to do with the factor of, like, when I was saying ask the how and why questions. There is something in the how why questions which is not largely we tend to ask the what where questions, who what where questions, which are largely factual in their thing, but the how why questions go behind a specific issue and try to ask, okay, if this is this, then what, then why, and how. And the moment you go there, you start arriving at a question where you can see that yes, this will build into something. You see, the other thing I'm also putting out to you, that it's not like, one can give you some instant gyan. Uh, I think I'd better switch off that chat box, because I keep getting distracted with questions I see.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
I'll just depend upon Vasanti, and hopefully we'll cover as many as we can, sort of things. No, see, the thing somewhere is, in terms of quality check, you'd find that's a matchup you also do between your question and how much deliberation has happened around it. What kind of, you get it, like, you raise up an issue and you say, oh my god, these are the sub points which I need to look at. And the moment you start finding a whole row of sub points coming, you're asking the right kind of questions. If on the other hand it becomes like almost close ended, you ask the question and there's an answer and that's the end of the matter, evidently you didn't ask the right question. Does it in some way satisfy you? See, it's also like, which was the reason why I was saying you continually keep writing through. You keep putting down, okay, this is what I thought, this is what I read, this has come further. And as you keep writing through it, the thinking processes get triggered. In India, I think I have to very, very strongly say to all my students, don't be scared to think. Don't be scared to have a mind of your own. Find the counterpoints. Don't make straw men and destroy them. Don't do that. But definitely find counterpoints, and you're going to find that as you keep, you allow for that growth to happen. It's like, see, a very, very different example, but I think because Vasanti and I both do Duolingo and we both do French, so I am suddenly finding that my doing of French, I have now reached a point which is there for me in English, where I will say, no, this doesn't sound right. Just that you so internalize their rules that you now don't have to do a stupid thing and say, oh my god, how? You know that, okay, these guys, they have a gender and number thing, and their adjectives come before and after, and so there's certain kinds of things that you internalize. Similar kind of stuff, I would say, is that when you are doing your research and you're asking those questions, you will suddenly at some point you'll find the penny drops and you'll say, no, ye mere ko relevant. This is not the problem I'm trying to address. And that is something that only practice can keep doing, and to be very alert on the fact that, hey, listen, am I just sitting there and piling up material? Because that's one of the biggest difficulties we have with researchers in India. I can say this much. And we run into, quite many of you run into trouble when you go and research abroad also, because you believe that just collecting material around an issue is enough. You've not scoped it enough. You've not asked that critical, you've not created that problem, and hence you run into difficulties. And that's what I would sort of say, okay, if you are finding that you are moving towards a reflective way of looking at it, and you're asking the right questions. Nobody can, see, it's like people are putting in that I am working in law and technology, or I am working in this and that and the other. how do I? See, you will have to, all I have said, you have to now apply it to your own problem and see, okay, what can I do? These were some hacks which were given to me. Possibly this is the route I can travel. So I would somewhere make that recommendation to you कि अच्छा ठीक है आप uh, with every question that you have, put down that question, see what possible answers. See that in those answers, where is it that you're actually finding a problem for which no one else has got an answer? That becomes your problem. It's
So
not that you make tons of questions and every question is not relevant. Most of them you're going to chuck out. From the question to the problem, the transition you're going to make, where you're finding something is being raised as an issue by so many people, nobody has really answered it. I have a way, I think I know what I can do there. And the moment you reach there, you're kind of sorted. You'll have all the grunge work to do, but at least the conceptual gets sorted. And it's basically because we do the grunge work, but we don't do the conceptual, that we run into trouble. And I think possibly my presentation was more to say, think more and look at more material which will help you think.
So there are a bunch of questions, and I'm going to try and tag them together, because the questions are about reliability of your materials. Because you were talking about the information glut. It is true that there is so much that you don't even know how to look at the really authentic materials, and how to look at the authoritative materials, which is important to engage with, irrespective of. You have to engage with authoritative material. So one is, how to engage with the right kind of material, and when there is no material. And the other question which I thought we should tag along is, Shantanu has a question which is talking about innovation. So the problem with innovation is, so do you get into and he's phrased his question as underlying ethics of a proposition. So whether it is about, suppose you've talked about this nature treated as a commodity, if you want to get into the underlying ethics, is that research worthy, and how does one do that kind of research? Is it so it would be purely
just repeat this last point that you made.
This is Shantanu Saha. Shantanu Saha is asking a question. The first question he asked was about the underlying ethics of a paradigm. And he's gone further and elaborated it, saying that, okay, a sustainability paradigm, for example, the present paradigm of nature being treated as a commodity. So when you're trying to question a paradigm like that, then is that too big for a PhD thesis, and how does one kind of work that question out?
Okay, it's like you can question the paradigm, but I think what you need to be doing somewhere is finding a specific enough problem to be looking at examining the larger paradigm. You can't examine the whole paradigm, but you can examine a small issue which is connected to that large paradigm, which necessarily, the third kind of question where I was saying that if there is no real social relevance to what, nobody's very interested in what you're saying, then maybe that's not the right kind of question. But on the other hand, if it's too huge, it's something which is beyond you, then I have a PhD candidate who's working on paradigms, but she's picked up literally two areas. She's looking at paradigms in relation to disability, and the whole question of capacity, and she's looking at the whole business of paradigm in ownership of property. And she's saying, okay, fine, these are the only two issues that she's examining. Because anything more than that would then become too much. So you can look at paradigms, but then you have to find some kind of, it's like we talk about climate change. It's a huge thing. But like one aspect of it that you are more concerned about, you can pick that up and you connect the two up together. So when you're talking in terms of that, I want to look at this entire business of looking at nature as commodity, because that's one of the things which has been the difficulty in relation to when we talk about the Anthropocene and what the Anthropocene has done, is that we kind of like monetized everything. Now, if I try to do for a PhD thesis monetization of nature, it's impossible. But you could pick up a smaller thing, just one small aspect of it, and say, this is going to be my focus. You're connecting up with the larger issue so that literature is kind of relevant to you. At the same time, you are, cutting your cloth according to what you can manage. So that we always say this, that you have to have this matchup between time and task. And then this many years that you have for doing your PhD thesis. you pick up that kind of work which can be done in that much time. Don't think that see, the other thing I also want to say to you all loud and clear, your PhD thesis is the start of your research career. It's not your lifetime work. It is something which is going to equip you to do research for the rest of your life. But it's not like okay, this is my final statement to the world. It's not. It is at the end of the day a degree with all the constraints of one. At the same time, if we are not making any kind of contribution to knowledge, then we have other difficulties, so one is trying to put forth both to you in the conversation I'm having here. Does that help you, Shantanu?
I think it has helped him think it further. I'm sure he'll look at it a little more.
No, but thinking further is kind of integral. That is, we can't possibly say that. Yeah. And none of us are presumptuous enough to believe that with one in a 1 hour presentation and some 2 hours after that, we're going to sort out your life problems. What we are possibly doing here, yes, this. What we are possibly trying to do here is to set up kind of a relationship of collegiality, wherein, you can say little older people are trying to say that, listen, ye problems get repeated on an all the time basis. At least create new problems which are your own. Don't do the same things which other people seem to be doing, and at the end of it, the consequence of the result is nothing great. That's the at some very major level, that's what we're trying to push push the conversation to. Do more thinking before you say, okay, this is the topic I want to work in. More thinking before you work on, okay, what are the questions? Because then you are not saying my topic dhoondna. The problem dhoondna. Is topic mein kya? Whoever has their microphone on, if you could please switch it off. In this topic, these are my questions. From these questions, this is the problem I have reached. You have to create that filter, because without creating that filter, it becomes an unmanageable exercise. And most people run into difficulties primarily because you bite more than you can chew.
So Abhishek has raised a hand and he has not typed a question. I don't know if there's any difficulty in typing out the question. So maybe we can just ask him to ask his question. Yes, Abhishek, are you not able to type out a question?
Ma'am, I have already typed the question.
Okay, do you want to ask the question?
Ma'am, my question is same about the reliability of the material. For example, if I'm working something with regard to the immigration or something with regard to COVID-19 data, which is solely available by the government, can I rely on the government data?
See, you can't, I think no data, Abhishek, can you be looking at in an unquestioning manner. There are specific kind of parameters that are there for any data. So you assess it on the basis of that parameter to say that, okay, it's authenticity. What is the authenticity coming from? What's the sample size? Who was doing the collection of data? All of that. You can't just take it as, okay, ye government data hai, that's it. But you begin from, like when we look at census, we look at the census data as authoritative to some extent, because if we did not, we would be into other kinds of difficulties. So if the government is putting out one level of data, Abhishek, and other data is coming from other sources, the very fact that you are comparing those data will kind of give you, what should I say, gives you a kind of a hook into the whole matter. You'd find that, okay, on a specific issues, there are several kind of studies. Just an intersect comparison of those studies will then get you to reach a point that this seems to be the consensus arising. Or not just because you found something which possibly agrees with the direction in which you want to go, then without asking questions on how the person arrived at what they arrived at, you go ahead and rely upon it. That's bad research. That's lazy research, because the kind of, source checking that you needed to do, you have not done. The due diligence, which, due diligence plays out in as much in research as in other places. So the due diligence which you needed to do, you have not done. Other than that, you don't have to, and the other thing which is also available, Abhishek, is that you start to point out, this is what I got from this data, this seems to be missing. So with these caveats, I'm relying on it. Because it means that you are looking at that data in a critical manner. You are not just mechanically putting out, that's the difference there.
Okay.
There was one question by Namit where, and I like the last line, which is what I think researchers worry about, which is that people won't believe you. So how do you find this whole business of innovation? The problem with trying to do innovation is that sometimes you think that you need to do something that's like very far out. I think we need to clarify that when we're saying innovation, it's not necessarily that, you have to talk about outer space or about some problem nobody has talked about, but even a very old problem is...
No, not just that. It's like not innovation as you talk about in patent law.
Yeah, correct.
It's not,
Invention.
Not that kind of innovation.
Have to do an invention.
It could well sometimes be just a gaze which changes. And the changing of the gaze changes the data and changes the reality. When we were talking in terms, at least feminism did that for so many of us. The very things that we took as like, okay, this is the role of men and this is the role of women, or this is how work has to be allocated and divided. For a longest period of time, so many of us were brought up in that manner and took it unquestioningly. You look at the entire restitution of conjugal rights cases wherein the wife is required to relocate because, whilst her career is requiring her to go elsewhere, the husband goes and files a restitution and the court says, yes, she should go back. Now, if you just took the line of that, okay, this is what the court has ruled and this is why, what they consider to be a reasonable excuse or reasonable reason or reasonable cause or not, that reasonableness itself has so much, like you can see it from so many angles the moment you change your lens. The other thing that we always tell our students when we do the research methodology coursework is that methodology is something you create for solving your problem. Similarly, what we are saying to you, and that's why I stopped at the point where we had found the problem. How we will, solve the problem, what are the methods that you're going to use there, is something which I feel if you're able to sell your problem, if you're yourself convinced about your problem, then your research methodology coursework will tell you how to go ahead with doing it. Don't worry on how, if it is like something which is a worthy problem to research, what methodology has to be created for it is the next stage. That's not what I have addressed in today's workshop at all. In fact, that's the reason why quite many colleagues who have already registered for their PhDs, who wanted to join this workshop, the extent to which we could find, we've not registered them. If somebody has still come through, because we had at that point of time had not put in educational qualifications, now we've changed the form. So in the second round of workshops, we will be looking at that. We wanted all people who were intending to do doctoral work to constitute the classroom, not people who are already doing. Because people who are already doing have different kinds of questions to ask, whereas you are still searching for what you should research on.
So the other kind of question, and I think it's important for framing your question, right? So when you're saying the whole idea of updation, so there is this constant obsession in law that you need to find the latest case, and unless you've used the latest case, then you're not being relevant, you're not being contemporary. So Ayush had this question that my work in law and tech, which is of course something that everybody has, is influenced by technological updates. So your constant worry is that, okay, tomorrow I'll have a case, or tomorrow there will be a judgment which will overturn whatever has been said today. So how does one, write a problem that is not so easily solved that you will have a decision tomorrow that says something different? How does one conceptualize a problem which is not going to be upset by any updates in either technology or in law or a statute or judgment, how does one frame a question that's like strong enough to withstand these kind of changes which are inevitable?
I'm sorry, but I'm not really comprehending what's the problem, because I think it's an inherent part of law that it changes a lot and it also stays the same, and both these things happen on a constant basis. That's the way in which we operate in the discipline. And the reason why we kind of also work very much on, okay, the is and the ought in law, though we try to say that no, we're not concerned with the ought, we are confining ourselves, or the ought should not make for an is, that sort of thing. But the truth of the matter still remains that we are, and on a constant basis doing research so that the is moves to an ought we want. Occasionally we might, and very often, see the basic structure, it's important, I think, for academics to know that the basic structure doctrine did not come from the Supreme Court first. It came from Conrad first. He wrote about it, and it's that writing which the court then used to create the basic structure doctrine. He talked in terms of that you can't speak about amendment in a manner wherein like you are totally transforming what you are. I mean, the original, the core should stay. That's only amendment. Otherwise, you are just restructuring, and that's not acceptable. And it was part of theoretical writing. So it's not like that, we have to, it overtakes your body of writing should have its own argument. And that's the reason why I've also spoken in terms of that possibly for you, it's not relevant to be looking at legal development so much because the law is lagging behind and you are proceeding further. You may be looking much more at, in writings which have come in the realm of technology and ethics in technology, you might find that is more relevant for what you're doing than just to look at how the law is responding to technology. Because it's also true that the law changes last. It changes on a constant basis, and yet it also changes last. It's like if you look at the way in which, just to stay with my own example, it's like the manner in which disability rights ka articulation has changed in disability studies is not how disability human rights has changed. Large part of disability human rights is still trying to, in some manner, fit in rights of people with disabilities within the paradigm of human rights. And if you're finding that the basic unit with whom you're operating have for a long time not even been considered human, you can't stay with that same paradigm of human rights. You have to recreate it. The fact that the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities went far, but maybe on some issues did not go far enough. I just have a young researcher who's kind of finished his doctoral work on sexual consent between persons with disabilities. And he's saying that the whole question of sexual autonomy is something that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has not even looked at. Now, if he was to just be guided by the CRPD, then he can't possibly be, and for creating his argument, he has gone to a whole body of philosophical writing, which speaks in terms of why sexual autonomy is so vital to an individual's identity. And then what is even more fascinating is that in doing it, he has then looked at that if you don't look at the manner in which infrastructure is created, you don't look at, okay, be it accessing a website or entering into a building or a place wherein if you are somebody who's living in an institution, there is no way in which you are going to have the kind of freedom and privacy to be able to, recognize that, yes, your, your sexual desires are a very integral part of your personality and needs to be given that kind of leeway. And yet, because the Vatican was very worried during the negotiations on the CRPD that homosexuality should not land up getting recognized in one way or the other, they didn't allow sexuality to be put into the convention. Does it answer you in some way?
So I think they will probably put it in the chat box whether, yeah. So Ayush says
Yeah.
yes. So Sakina has a question about what is the role of the PhD supervisor and how do we use them as a resource.
Well, like in our research methodology course, we used to do a small film that we had done with, we had kind of interviewed Professor Bakshi on how he thought of it. And he spoke about the PhD supervisor should think of himself or herself as a sathi, as a, as a colleague who's kind of your comrade in arms working with you. But the other thing I would say to you is basically this, that your supervisor is somebody there to help you, assist you, be your sounding board. Some of us are more lucky with one, some of us are less lucky. But at the end of the day, it's your PhD. And it's important somewhere that you should own it. Don't ever tell the supervisor, I'll do what you want me to do. Because if you can't stand up with one supervisor, where are you going to defend your thesis other places? It's true, all of us have to work with the real politic of if the supervisor decides to screw your life over. It can be difficult, but I do think that there are a whole range of other appellate processes one should use instead of kind of giving up on. So I see the supervisor's role as primarily a comrade in arms, a colleague, and somebody who's an advisor. Yes, that's to look into allied subjects. Anyway, I'm sorry, Vasanti. I get distracted even once, and I get. I'm trying very hard.
No, yeah, it's because it's always, it keeps popping up and you think.
Because it pops up, no, then you suddenly, I close my chat box just so that I can, and then I had pop-ups happening.
So Siri has a very genuine question, and I think we should address this about people who haven't had too many opportunities. So if you've done your masters through distance education, or you come from a completely rural background, then would that be a setback for doing research?
I wouldn't say no. I would say that you are coming with a perspective which is uniquely yours. So don't put yourself on the back foot on that count. And also, like, one of the things that they'll tell you for any work, that quality work comes with hunger. And hunger comes from people who have been starved. If anybody who's kind of had it easy, kinds of things, they're all sorted. In fact, large amount of time, sometimes we have to spend both as in our LLB program and in our master's program to be telling our students, itna bhi nahi aata hai. Like just because you've cleared the CLAT and you've come. So the same sort of point I would make in relation to the PhD, it's the hunger which counts. Because somebody has come from a prestigious institution and from an urban area with more resources, maybe is not as hungry as you are. So I don't think you should be defensive about it. You should see it as that you're bringing a perspective which is not common. And be proud of it, that this is something that I know of, which others don't. Because when you put yourself out in that manner, you perform better. If you are defensive, then you tend to sort of feel that, I don't know enough. There'll be so many things that you know about that they don't know about. Recognize the fact there are certain things you don't know about. That's okay, but don't have to feel lesser for it.
So Dikshita is saying the question is, then we have to have think about a problem, look at the questions, and then again reformulate the problem. Are you seeing this as a continuous?
Yes, it's a continuous process. It's a continuous process, which is why I'm saying keep writing. Keep writing in small pieces. Keep writing everything you encounter. Because that is the way in which, before your formal thesis writing happens, you have kind of got yourself into the reflective mode. I don't know, some book I was reading in this point, like preparing for this workshop, wherein one major film critic was asked, So what did you think of this film? And he says, I don't know, I haven't written about it, is it? It's like that. You'll notice it, that the moment you start putting pen to paper, even if it's a very zero draft kind of thing that you're putting on, the aid to reflection is that much greater. Also, then the writing doesn't become such a huge thing when you actually start to do it, because you've been doing it all the time.
This is the other question that we kind of touched upon it, but I think there's no harm in reiterating, re-stressing this problem, that we usually come up with this understanding that the law is all sorted out. The problem is in the implementation. I think we've said this before, but there's no point in saying it again, that there is a policy, law has also been framed, there is a lack of implementation. How, as a researcher, can we bridge that gap? That is the question coming in from Upasana, I think. Yes.
So what I would say somewhere is, go back to that point I was making about where if you don't ask the how and why questions, then necessarily you'll end up saying it's only interpretation or it's only implementation. Whereas when you ask the how and why questions, you ask more fundamental questions on the construction of, presumptions within the law. And we've been, I'm sorry if I'm kind of going back to my own work on a constant basis, but that's what basically because I know it best, is that when I first started out and I was thinking in terms of the whole question of unsoundness of mind, it's like by the time I kept looking at it again and again, I realized that this construction of unsoundness of mind in this very unproblematic manner in law is the problem. And because it's in this unproblematic manner, I also found that it was a major forensic strategy. If I was wanting, like say, I made a bad deal, I bought a property which suddenly, I sold a property and suddenly the prices climbed up, and I don't want to keep my contract. So then it becomes like that, my advanced age can be argued as senility, and then you are consequently trying to opt out of the manner in which your entire relationships in marriage kind of thing. I mean, you actually found that the legal construction of unsoundness of mind had to do with vested interests of various other kinds, had nothing really to do with the individual person. Though we said that this is being done to protect people, or, so that this person is not in any way exploited. You in fact found that it's a construct that you have introduced in the law as a way of escaping bad bargains. So I would somewhere, put out that to say it's all settled and is a way of looking at. The moment you dig deeper, you will come to that, okay, at which point of time did this construction come? And why? If women were treated in a certain kind of a way at a certain point of time, because see, a lot of the whole sati thing, you can present it like it was a religious, like strong religious feelings that people had, that, okay, the wife had to go with the husband. But you also found it had a lot to do with ownership of property and why you wanted to get rid of this woman. So various prathas or various practices or concepts within law, what causes them to come is a good question to ask. So which is why I was, if you look at Roscoe Pound has done this entire exposition on personhood or persons within his books of jurisprudence, and amongst the things that he's done it across, across cultures and times and countries and what have you. And his one big finding somewhere was that who is considered a person before the law or not is dependent upon the social, political, economic structures of that time. I thought it was and there's a large amount of data he's looked at, but the core finding he's reached is just that. And which is why people who are writing on personhood today they are saying this is something which is always going to be there. You're always going to have some people whom you are excluding because your social, political, economic structures require you to do so. So you necessarily need to think about personhood from other kind of parameters. Okay, let me say, just add one more sentence there. It's like this, to say, hey, it is, like what I would want to be putting forth to you as the, it is as researchers, when we say it's only poor implementation or it's poor interpretation, and we don't then unpack what we mean by poor implementation and poor interpretation, we are just being lazy. If we actually have, the kind of point which somebody was making at the beginning, implementation, if we can actually sort of say that humne kara empirical work and we can demonstrate what is the implementation issue, then you are doing research. Otherwise, you're just doing journalistic flourish. Similarly, if you're saying interpretation is the issue and you actually have concrete, examples of how interpretation is an issue, then that's an acceptable body of research that you're doing. But you can also be going further and saying, okay, I've looked at the implementation component, I've looked at the interpretation component, but there is still something which is like not, not adequately addressed. And there is a conceptual unsoundness in how this particular principle was introduced in law, and that's what I'm attacking and I'm trying to do. Which is why I was giving you the example of that whole notion of sexual autonomy of people with disabilities. I'm certain, because when I read his thesis, I felt, okay, and he's very, very passionate about it. But I will be honest with you, I did not realize it was such a big issue till I read his thesis. Because you just take it for granted, no? That, okay, that your infrastructure itself is kind of ruling the kind of consent you will give or not, you take for granted.
Nandini has just said, ma'am. I don't know why she hasn't finished her question. And yeah, Nandini, is there a problem? You've just said, ma'am. You haven't said anything else. You haven't written out a question.
Ma'am, I'm just typing the question out in the chat box. I'm so sorry. I just little got confused. I'm just going to type it in the chat box. I think it becomes easier for you to read as well.
Okay. So do you want to take Professor Mustafa's question, Prasidanda, where he says, what is the utility of a PhD other than as a basic degree to join?
I frankly don't agree with that. And I've been saying it several places that I give a lot of value to a PhD, but this insistence on it being as an entry-level degree is not a good idea. And coupled with the fact of that you can't be a professor unless you have guided a PhD, I think it's something which is, for me, it gets alarm bells going.
No, I completely agree. But I think the utility of a PhD is also something that we touched upon in our methodology workshops, where we said, in a way, it's an opportunity to do something that you want to do. Where usually you don't have the space to do something where you yourself you're the complete owner, author. That's something that you've spoken about in the methodology workshops, right? That sense of ownership over your topic and your area. That's worthwhile to do in itself, irrespective of whether it's the degree that is.
No, I'm not denying it. I think a lot of us, Patricia Broy had this one very beautiful metaphor that she sort of said, that your PhD work is like the pickle in the house. Yes, it is not a mere degree, Professor Mustafa, I agree. But unfortunately, when you kind of make something like this a mandatory requirement till people are ready for it, it starts to become like a mere degree. Like Patricia Broy had this thing of where she talked in terms of your research work, your doctoral work, as the pickle in the house, like you can use it over a lifetime. How well you made them, 8-10 saal tak chalte hain. Like you keep using things from it, things which you did not put in the thesis, but you had done work on. So there is a lot of opportunity of doing deep work whilst doing a PhD. One of our reasons for doing this entire series of workshop is to encourage people that, okay, it's horrible that they are insisting on making it a mandatory requirement, but if we want to then not, like somehow the other get a degree, that doesn't contribute to your own independence and autonomy and your confidence as a scholar. All of us can tell you that those of us who had the opportunity of being able to turn in, the sort of work which you can be proud of, what it does to you as a scholar forever. Because we all the time speak in terms of, nepotism in our educational institutions, the way in which possibly, I think Vice Chancellor has left, so I can say, he told me he's leaving, so it's so, see, it's like if you're not proud of your own work, and you can take on virtually anybody who's in an administrative position if you are confident with what you have done. That's the investment your PhD does for you. And that's the reason why we are like really spending all of this time as a university in nurturing young scholars and saying, listen, don't be satisfied with less. Play to your strengths, but do the best you can do there. Quality scholarship comes from there. To say, like somebody had asked, what is a role of supervisor? Role of supervisor is definitely not to bully you. And your role is not to get bullied. You have to ensure to it that you stand up for your work. And do that kind of work which you can be proud of. All of us, I mean, I don't know about, because Vasanthi and me and some other colleagues, we have worked together. See, you can move ahead and work and do your research after doing the PhD, it's true. But the PhD, how well it gets done, equips you to do that further work. If it's done in a shoddy manner, then the rest of your research work also carries on in the same way. There is something to be said for a degree. That's my point. And I can definitely sort of vouch for it that it contributes very majorly to the confidence of a scholar. And you can't speak in terms of, like academic freedom unless and until you have academic competence. We need to nurture competence and we need to encourage competence. That's my basic point. You need to have people say that, no, this is my work. Of course. That's undeniable. That research doesn't end with the award of PhD. In fact, the PhD is the start. I said that at an earlier point when I had said, don't think this is your lifetime work. It is not. Okay, bye. Don't think it is your lifetime work. It is not. But at the same time, if you don't do that work at a certain caliber, then what that doctorate means, if it doesn't make an independent scholar out of you, then you haven't, the point has got missed out. And I suppose that's where my difficulties come. Yeah.
So there is one question about, would you want to suggest any books to read before writing a proposal?
Okay, I have just encountered a couple which I would share with you all. We'll send it in before the, There are a couple of books which are talking in terms of, in fact, some of the stuff I have made, I've taken up from those books, so you should go and rely on them. There's one which talks in terms of the salsa of research methodology, how research methodology is like doing the salsa dance, and speaks in terms of like how you need to create that kind of rhythm and proceed. And in fact, that entire point about, so I'll share those books with you, which seem to be, like doing some useful work there. So those references we'll provide.
So there are two questions which come up. So one is by Monica, where she's saying about the use of gender-neutral terms in legislations in academics. So what difference would changing these terms mean? Because the counter to that is that notions and actions in society haven't changed. So is it something that is worthwhile to research on?
See, it's a lot. I mean, there's one of the things that a lot of us discuss on a constant basis is to do with your own politics as a researcher. What is your politics as a researcher? What is it? Why, if people insisted on gender neutral terms, why would they insist on them? Because if you are, let's just look at it. If you constantly use the male pronoun for everything, and then you say he includes she or man includes woman, so actually it's the other way around. It's in the man is included within woman if you look at it etymologically. But if you say that, what is it? What happens? Does something happen, or is it only a like a politically correct linguistic practice? When you are constantly using he, then your world, you're constituting the world in a manner. No, there is no format of this thing. Nonsense.
You're again reading the questions.
I'm sorry. It just popped up and it was like, what the?
So Nandini's question.
I'm just carrying on with, sorry, I seek your forgiveness again. No,
So
the point from there is that if you talk about gender neutral terminology, it is not like gender neutral terminology is just something that you are doing in terms of being politically correct. It's also got to do with the entire power dynamics, both in the world and in society, and especially in law. The moment you are like the way you refer to something, if you're constantly using the male pronoun, do you really include women? Can you be saying, I mean, like I had this, I think Usha Ramanathan has this very interesting piece in our engendering law book, where she speaks in terms of reasonable man and reasonable woman. And she says, if you really look at what is expected of the reasonable woman and what you are wanting from the reasonable man, that within the reasonable man, you actually never included the reasonable woman. So unless and until you start to kind of, in gender neutrality, do we then construct a more inclusive way of looking at gender? Or if you are saying that, all right, there are certain things which only impact on men, some things only happen to women, something happens to trans people and other people who don't come within your gender binary, then, and you're going to explicitly name and work on that basis, what is your politics? It's definitely a more inclusive politics, which maybe gender neutrality doesn't serve. So which pronouns you use and why could be something that you need to reflect upon as a researcher, and has to do with your larger politics.
So Nandini's question was this, that sometimes we come across a difficult circumstances where we need to look into a case-to-case basis due to the multifaceted nature of the problem, though law should operate to reduce this sort of generalization, but also applies generally. So how do we solve this problem? So how do you talk about, especially for law, the idea is that it applies to a larger section, but then we also want that, that specificity to a particular question. How does one kind of balance those conflicts?
I suppose we do that to some extent with the kinds of provisos that we bring in, the exceptions that you bring in. They are, I mean, say the distinction that people make between, say, legislation and adjudication, or between legislation and administration. In legislation, we come up with the more generalized norms. In administration, as well as in adjudication, you individuate. And which is the reason why when you have a body of law where not enough adjudication has happened, which is like all of poverty law, because people who are poor don't have the wherewithal to reach courts, the kind of fine-tuning or individuation which happens in adjudication doesn't happen for that body of people. So it's actually inbuilt, but it depends on that. If you don't have access to, like administrators, when you're dealing with a whole range of people who can't represent, then you may find that the sort of individuation that you're speaking about cannot or doesn't happen. But it's not like we just make general rules and we don't have interpretation. To a large extent is about individuation.
But there is also design of the law, right? When the law has been designed to exclude, the law law is designed to include, then when that goes into design of law as much as it goes into adjudication.
No, I was just addressing that point she was making, where she said that, all right, you come up with a general rule. What do you do to the exception? I'm saying that actually we have, in the way in which the law plays out, you have made scope for exception. But if you belong to a body of, a category of people wherein you can't really assert that right, then you get ousted. Which was my connection for why it becomes that, okay, how much wherewithal do you have to go to court? Can you really represent your case before an administrator? We talk about principles of natural justice and we talk in terms of the rightful exercise of discretion. But everybody cannot protest about the wrongful exercise. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a very, very good landing of her question. But there's also the question about design flaws. That is an independent project, right? I mean, when we're talking about paradigms of laws and laws being exclusionary, that's a separate.
Yeah, I don't think that was the question she was raising. If she was, then I don't know, because the way I understood it is, okay, you come up with general rules, and what do you do for, I'm saying is that actually, if you look at the system, it's not like it doesn't allow for individuation. But everybody doesn't have same opportunity for individuation. That's the point I was making.
True.
But the point that you were making is wherein by design you have excluded some people.
Yeah.
Then evidently, again, Vasanthi, it works out as that if by design you have been excluded, as a constitutional law person, you know that your entire equality jurisprudence is about challenging just that, but everybody cannot do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it ties up with the like where you legitimize the exclusion and you say कि हाँ जी ठीक है कर दिया तो.
So then, of course, Burhan's question about the politics of a researcher. I think that's something you have to say. You have to answer that. Does a researcher have politics? Because the general norm seems to be that they don't.
Of neutrality. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, I would somewhere say, at least my position as a researcher has been that a researcher must have a politics. Because what do you understand as politics is like, for me, it's like wanting to alter the power dynamics of a society, and definitely in favor of the disadvantaged. I'm very clear on the fact of that your whole business of activism, it's not like anybody who's kind of working outside the script is being activist. Similarly, I would say if your politics as a researcher is about empowering the excluded, that's the kind of politics I would endorse. Of course, you can have a politics which is about reinforcing privilege. But then that is your politics, and it is a very status quoist politics. And neutrality to a great extent does just that. So when you have this huge celebration of neutrality, it comes from this place of where you are in to a great extent trying to reinforce the status quo. It's, on the other hand, it's like I think we had done this disability workshop wherein we were having this back and forth on that, is there a case, some kind of a case for objectivity? So the way I would somewhere say it is this, that politics is one thing. Objectivity has more to do with the fact of, remember that whole question that we had earlier where people were talking in terms of materials and saying that, okay, what kind of material do I rely upon? And I would somewhere say is that objectivity is about the fact is that just when you encounter materials which seem to be advancing your position, and then you don't look for anything else and say, wow, this has come, that is something which I'm not seeing that as part of politics. I'm seeing it as part of doing shoddy research, using research more like advocacy. That I would have a difficulty with. But to have a politics in research, I think you must have, because otherwise, why are you entering into and tormenting yourself if you don't think that you are going to in some manner get people to think on that one issue on which you are working from a fresh angle? Utna ambition to hona chahiye na. both ambition and politics, because it should be. See, the point I had made, I think in one of my slides, it said, okay, the issue that you're choosing to, and I think which caused fellows to write, ask that, oh, if there is no concrete result, then should one not research on it? What I am somewhere saying is that some level of larger social relevance is also a criteria in determining what you are going to research on. The innumerable kinds of PhD thesis that people want to do on stare decisis in Article 21. I'm not saying you can't do Article 21 and stare decisis thesis in a manner wherein you are, demonstrating their social relevance. But if you are not doing that and you're just doing a technocratic exercise, then your politics is a politics of privilege. It's a politics which is reinforcing the status quo, and your research is doing that. So you better be cognizant that that's what you're doing. Objectivity, on the other hand, but shouldn't objectivity be enough in changing paradigms? That's what you're saying. My thing somewhere is, Burhan, the point I would want you to think about is that why are you wanting to change that paradigm? That's your politics. How you are going to carry on, that's your objectivity. You can't possibly say that because this is my politics, इसलिए जो भी material मेरे opposite जा रहा है, मैं सबका सबको drop कर दूंगा. That is an infringement of your obligation of objectivity, and you can't do it. On the other hand, if you are finding a paradigm problematic, then why are you finding it problematic? Must be something there, no, which you are uncomfortable with, or you want to alter. You can't handle it only with objectivity. Objectivity is the execution, but your political position comes before the execution. I think you got my point, no, Burhan, the point I was making. I'm just distinguishing the spaces at which this will come up, or the junctures at which you will raise them. Or we're done.
I think you covered most of them, unless somebody thinks that I haven't picked up a question that needed answering.
Nandini was still writing. Did she write her question?
Yeah, she wrote her question. Hers was the question about the specificity and the generality of law.
Okay. Anyone else? We still have some time, so
Yeah.
we can do like something like an open house now. Yeah. Yes, Aparajita. I think Aparajita is typing. Huh?
Aparajita, you can turn on your microphone and speak.
At this time, we can allow it.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So I did my master's thesis on a relatively unexplored area. And when I was standing for my final defense, the professor ended up asking me, my topic was horizontal federalism in India. And obviously it spilled out into different disciplines. And I ultimately ended up standing there, and the professor had obviously a lot more knowledge on the topic, and he started asking me questions which I hadn't been able to explore because of paucity of time. So how does one deal with such things? Because that could happen in a doctoral work also. It's impossible to actually be able to deal with everything in one piece of research. So how does one tackle it?
Thanks. See, it is like this, Aparajita. You have, just as you have good students and bad students, and good supervisors and bad supervisors, you have good examiners and bad examiners. But on the correct protocols of research, when you scope a problem and you say, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm not doing, then rightfully you can only be asked questions on what you are doing, or what you have done. What you have not done, I mean, like, people can disagree. If your examiner disagrees and feels this is insufficient, they might become a reason for them not to. That doesn't happen. But sometimes people just don't read enough and come for and just ask whatever from the top of their head. You can't really prepare for it. You can only sort of speak in terms of, this is what I was planning to do, and this is why I did not do what you were saying. And that's the only thing that you can sort of, like, make a case for. That, I mean, to say that you should have done everything, it's not just a question of time constraint, it's a question of quality of work. If I'm trying to do in a period of 4 months or something, which is what we have for doing our LLM dissertations, I can't do a 4 years work in 4 months. No? So necessarily I have to carve it out in such a manner that in those 4 months, what is the best that I can do?
All right, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, I think we should. We should say that this is what my work is not doing, because that's what scoping is about. If we are saying that if you write it in 5 words and evidently you're encompassing everything, on the other hand, I can't be, the claim that I should be putting forth is that this is the work I've done, this is why it is defensible, this is why it is worthwhile. I have to just defend that. I don't have to be sort of saying that, okay, everything. I mean, I think the point which Professor Mustafa was making earlier, it's like, I really don't know why people are asking for hypotheses in a proposal, because its hypothesis is something that you arrive at a certain point of time. You can have a problem of a certain kind, or you can have I think one of the books I was reading was saying, you can have a draft hypothesis. This is what I am intending to do. So the thing that you need to be, this whole question of scoping is a very integral part of doing your doctoral work. I am not doing everything. I can't. And that's why I was making that connection with the point which Professor Mustafa was making earlier, when he was saying that, okay, PhD is the start. I think this is what I'm doing for my PhD. This is how I plan to build on it. Have those lines for yourself. I know I'm sorry, we don't ask for it, but I know lots of people, people do ask for a hypothesis and chapterization, if you name it, in the proposal. You're still going to do your coursework, you're still thinking in terms of, to ask for all of those things is crazy. And it's also got to do with the fact of where people believe that a research proposal has to be one kind of a no, you can say, the thing is, there's a difference, Burhan, between having a problem which you are putting forth and having a hypothesis. Hypothesis is taking a position. I think at the proposal stage, it's too early to say I have a problem. This is the problem that I'm going to investigate. These are vital questions that I'm going to see. Your research board should be persuaded with that. But to ask people to take positions because a hypothesis is taking a position, is at the end of the day, a hypothesis is a statement, which you then go to prove and disprove. Itna sorted nahi hote ho proposal ke level pe. And that demand is, I think, unjustified, just as a demand for chapterization is unjustified. It doesn't mean a darn thing, but we insist on asking for it.
Yes, ma'am, you raise your hand.
Everywhere, so that, like, more and more people start to think again about what they demand. Remember, Vasanthi, we went through that whole book started asking for only 1,000-word thing. Yes. It was a problem which is worthy of research.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry to disturb you with the question that, yes, the question that I put up on the chat as well, that's because last year I had applied to NLU itself, and I did not get selected because of the research methodology and hypothesis part, which now I understand that Nalsar does not require, but they expected me to have my methodology in place, which I found a little extensive, because I mean, at the preliminary stage, how do you expect the proposal to have all of
whichever institution is insisting upon it doesn't seem to know too much about research.
Yes, thank you for the clarifying that Nalsar does not require.
No, we don't. We actually, what we ask for is basically that you put in 1,000-worder literally 1,000 words or maybe 1,500 words, telling us what is the problem you have found on which you want to do work. The
Yes.
research methodology and other things is something that we would guide you through. Otherwise, what is the institution going to help you with? And you've just about arisen at a problem. At the proposal stage, if all this is sorted, it's a mockery, yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your help.
The more important thing, Macmillan, would be to find out whether the problem was something that is like where some, like something was missing.
Ma'am, actually, in my interview, they really liked my problem and they gave me a very good feedback on the problem as such. But they said that I didn't have clarity on the methodology to be followed. So that was one of the reasons I asked the question. But I am still actually not very clear on the methodology.
No, because it can't be. See, the thing is this, that, like I'm saying, that the whole doing of a PhD, in fact, one of our colleagues in our research methodology workshop said that actually speaking, the whole PhD is a survey of literature.
Yes.
That's what you are doing. You're constantly saying, this is what I am looking at, this is what other people have looked at. You can't have a section on survey of literature. It's like your entire thesis, if it is convincing, then you've done an adequate survey of literature. That's a way in which, but somehow or the other, unfortunately, research methodology is one of those areas wherein everybody has kind of, mugged up some terms. Quantitative कर रहे हो, qualitative कर रहे हो. आपका sampling कैसा होगा, आपका hypothesis क्या है? These are questions which you encounter in, but honestly, I'm telling you that research methodology is like, these are the tools, various kinds of qualitative, quantitative sampling, this, that, and the other. These are tools. Whether you need to use them or not will depend upon the problem you're investigating. So research methodology is something which is constructed differently in every thesis. There is no standard template. In fact, I don't know whether you had asked this question, where Vasanthi told me that again you're starting to answer the chat, but somebody had said, can we
Yes,
get
ma'am. I had asked the proposal
and I said,
because
no.
that was the same thing which was the requirement in another university. So they actually had us do a literature review and hypothesis and a very, very elaborate format.
See, Macmillan, I am also saying that some level, if you look at the presentation I made with you all, you have to do that level of reading.
Yes.
To arrive at the problem, that nobody is denying. You can't really call it a survey of literature. It's more like you're saying that, like, I have found this is a problem. All the literature I have reviewed is not addressing this problem or has, not answered this question, but they've answered allied questions. And hence I'm proposing this.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
So I think we can call it a day, Vasanthi. Looks like.
Yes, and I think we've had a flying start to the Flying Kites workshop. Thank you all for participating and for your engagement in your questions. Thank you, Professor Dhanda.
Yeah, and I would also sort of encourage you, like, if you are, what is your procedural question, Burhan?
How much time a part-time PhD student needs to put in the university? So do we have a requirement to come and stay on campus? I think that's the question. That's how I understood it, at least.
No, we don't have.
No, but we do have a methodology workshop.
We have a methodology workshop and we have other requirements in part of the coursework, which will be like, the methodology workshop means that 15 days on a morning to night basis, you are with us. The other is that we have now progressively, which we might do it on a hybrid mode. It's one of the kinds of, like, advantages of the pandemic that we have devised. We have understood that it's possible to create workshops for our registered students, especially the part-time registered students, without insisting that they have to come on campus. So, which is why you would have a lot of coursework to do. You'd have things that you would have to do, but you don't have to come. Because I think, I'll tell you very honestly, both Vasanthi and I can sort of share this with you, this way our position is. We are recognizing the fact that people have to do PhDs on a part-time basis. Our point somewhere is that just because it's done on a part-time basis doesn't mean it doesn't have to be done well. we are concentrating on is being done well rather than on this factor of कि आप campus में आके हमारे सर पे dance करो, हमें नहीं जरूरत है, तो आप घर में रहो. I mean, of course, if you want to do it full time and you want, I mean, there are other kinds of which one would encourage people to do. But if you are doing it part time, we kind of recognize the part timeness of the work and try to ensure that worthwhile work happens without it sort of becoming just a bureaucratic requirement of that this many months you have to be here or this many days here. I'm telling you what we will absolutely insist upon, where it's a non-negotiable thing for us. It is that 15-day workshop that we have. For that, you have to come in person and you have to be on campus. Then we build up on that coursework with other kinds of workshops. But that one is a physical presence one. Okay, then thank you so much, Vasanti. It was like really motivation as always. You really, this is your pencha. I think you should it.
Thank you all. Bye.
All right, thank you everybody. And yeah, I mean, I will sort of give you the names of the books and try and share. But also I would like ask you to go and look at the other workshops to see, okay, if they have a matchup. We're going to do labor law and we're going to do, other areas in the second batch. But in this one, the criminal law, family law, they're not going to be done like typical family law, criminal law things. They are going to be, our constitutional law, of course, has a huge subscription. We have to turn away many people. But I'm saying is that the others also, please do have a look. Because if you are looking for, and these are like traditional areas of law, if you land up doing a good PhD there, the kind of opportunities you may have as teachers and otherwise would be greater. Because these are mandatory courses, they will be taught all the time. And you get somebody who's kind of thinking about it from fresh, like eyes. It will be a gain for everyone, for the individual as well as for the institution. Then they're all the time looking for, I think we're going to do taxation and mercantile law in the second round. We're going to do labor law in the second round. We have another one in relation to social science methods. I'm thinking in terms of doing one on disability. So it's like, the way we're trying to work out another batch of, but I'm just saying is that don't think that, this is not my area. You might just find that, these are researchers who may land up giving you a, Yes, Burhan, we'll do that, yeah. He wants us to send an email on the books and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure.
Because we anyway have your emails, so there shouldn't be an issue. If we forget, please remind us. I nowadays tell everybody that please remind. Okay, chalo, theek hai. So see you tomorrow.